Hello folks, this is going to be a video overview of Chapter 5 for our textbook for 161-162, that's College Comp 1 and 2. At the end of this video, if you have any questions, remember you can always email me, canvas me with those questions, and I will do my best to assist. So Chapter 5 is a little lengthy. It does go a lot into depth regarding rhetoric. If at any point, I'm going to try my best to keep this video in under 10 minutes, but if it goes over 10 minutes, I apologize in advance. As always, if you would like to take notes on this video, you are more than welcome to. Not required, but notes might help you in a future assignment or future course. So here we go. Chapter 5, Addressing Audience and Rhetoric. So the rhetorical situation, which was section 5.1, talks about understanding the art of persuasion. So rhetoric is the art and science of persuasion. It encompasses textual, verbal, oral, and visual communication, and all human activities involve rhetorical elements, even if unconsciously. So we are using rhetoric in our everyday life without always knowing that we're using rhetoric. Writing is a very social activity. It's produced by people, for particular goals. The rhetorical situation can help writers and readers think through and determine why text exists and what they aim to do and how they do it in particular situations. So here are the elements of a rhetorical situation. You have the writer. It could be an individual, it could be a group, it could be an organization authoring a text. Regardless, they're influenced by a lot of personal and social factors. Then you have the audience. This is the reader or the people that are engaged by the text. They bring their own experiences and values. So then we tie in the purpose. This is the writer's aim as well as the text aim. So this can be both personal and shared. The exigence is the urgent need or imperfection that the text responds to. Subject is the major topic addressed by the writer, the text, and the audience. The context could be social, cultural, geographic, political, and institutional. Pardon the typo right there. The genre refers to the type of text produced, appropriate to the situation, and obviously following genre conventions. In writing, audience refers to the individuals or groups that a writer communicates with through their writing. So, writers often address different types of audiences, and each of them require a different approach. For example, when you're writing an essay for a class, of course, your primary audience may be your instructor, but you have to remember that you're also writing to your classmates who are going to peer review your work. There are different types of audiences in academic writing. You have your imagined audience. This is, like the hypothetical people that we are writing for. Then you have the difficulty. The students off with this is that students often default to writing for their teacher. So, like we said on the previous slide, it's important to consider that your work isn't just going to be read by your instructor, but it could also be read by other people. Real and interactive audiences are those that can respond and offer feedback, like peers in online communities. So, when you are addressing an interactive audience, which is why we peer review, it gives you the opportunity to embrace diverse perspectives through the act of sharing your own work and to explore what it means to be rhetorically aware. Discourse communities are groups that share common interests and language, often connected to academic disciplines. So, the significance of this is that effective communication can be built within a discourse community and it requires adherence to its conventions. So, for example, different academic disciplines have unique languages, documentation styles, and communication formats. For example, in the English and humanities community, arts and humanities, we want to stick with the MLA format. Of course, you'll run into some instructors that want your work to be an APA, but primarily you're going to run into the MLA format. Why does all of this matter? Why not just write an MLA all the time and use the same word choices and tone every time you write? It goes back to illustrating whether or not you are credible and whether or not you are aware of the conventions and communications required in a discourse community. If you are aware, your credibility also goes up. When you write, it's important to think in terms of the communities that we're participating in and whose members we're addressing. What do they assume? What kind of questions do they ask? What counts as evidence? Think of it this way: you earn credibility when discussing a basketball team's performance when you know all the names of the team members. And in a different context, you demonstrate credibility when you know when and where and how to use APA rather than MLA in various academic contexts. So, rhetorical appeals. Here is the triangle overview. So, this is based on Aristotle's principles of rhetoric, which is essential for understanding effective argumentation. The components of the triangle consist of the speaker, aka voice, the audience, and the message, aka the text. Aristotle's rhetorical appeals. So there's four that we're going to go over here. Ethos is the appeal to character, authority, and expertise. So, for example, celebrity endorsements are an aspect of ethos. A misconception here is that ethos is often mistaken for ethical appeal. It makes sense. Ethos and ethical sounds familiar or similar, but they are not. Ethos is more like expertise, authority. Pathos is an appeal to emotions. It could be positive and or negative. So this is important to decision making. Understanding audiences' emotions is key. The problem with pathos is that it can be misleading or overwhelming, overpowering logic and reasoning. And you'll see some of this in some of the ads that we see on TV. Logos is the appeal to logic. This focuses on clarity, on consistency, on soundness. So, the nice consideration with logos is that it varies across audiences and cultures. Logical evidence is not universally persuasive. So it's always interesting to see how, like for example, advertisements, how they incorporate logic and reasoning into their rhetoric. And then you have kairos, the concept of timing and appropriateness in argumentation. So this involves understanding the right moment for persuasion, considering current events and cultural context. If you do not know these, definitely write them down. In modern context, here's ethos. So, Sofia Vergara endorses personal care products. Her perceived beauty and confidence enhance credibility, especially in products like Head and Shoulders shampoo. Pathos in political campaigns, you'll notice that certain tactics utilize fears and hopes of specific demographics. Like you have ads targeting retired voters with threats to social support programs, like, oh my gosh, so the Social Security program will end if you don't do this and this. So the effect here is that they're playing on pre existing emotions, often without needing factual support. Then you have logos and public perception. The challenge here is what is considered logical varies, and it's influenced by audiences' values and beliefs. For example, the disbelief in vaccine safety despite scientific evidence due to distrust in sources like the FDA. And we saw this a lot when we were dealing with the pandemic, with COVID and things like that. You had a lot of people that were pro vaccine, a lot of people that were anti vaccine. And even though, there's a lot of scientific evidence to back up A and B, you still have people that believe in A and B. So it's very important that we are rhetorically aware as writers because it helps us to understand these elements as crucial for crafting effective arguments. If we can consistently balance ethos, pathos, and logos in our own writing, we can construct our arguments can be a lot more stronger than they are without these rhetorics. For audiences, it's important to recognize these appeals. That way we can understand another person's message and or their intention. And you'll notice this a lot in advertisements. Advertisements really do play with our emotions, play with our minds. And that's how they get us. That's how companies get us to buy the things that we buy because they're playing with our rhetoric And if we're not rhetorically aware, then, like we kind of fall into that trap. There are fallacies and rhetorical appears, and these are errors in reasoning, and they can range from unintentional mistakes to deliberate deception. And it's important to recognize and avoid these fallacies. We want to make sure that our writing is academically sound. We have to practice academic integrity and effective communication. And the only way that we can do that is by understanding these fallacies and avoiding them. So here are some of the fallacies that the text goes over. We've got begging the question, which is circular reasoning without actual proof. Tall people are more successful because they accomplish more. Okay, that doesn't really make any sense. We don't really have any actual proof within that statement. Then you have the either or fallacy, where you're only presented two options when more exist. It's kind of like election ads. You might be provided with like a Democrat versus Republican candidate when you also have an independent candidate that you may or may not want to vote for. And then you have false analogies. These are inappropriate comparisons of dissimilar things. Like, this summer camp job is like a rat cage. They feed us and let us out on a schedule. It doesn't make sense. The comparison does not work there. Hasty generalizations. This is when people draw conclusions without sufficient evidence. Non sequiturs are when people relate unrelated ideas as cause and effect. If you like dogs, you would like a pet lion. How so? I don't really know. Like, is it the fact that they're on all fours? Who knows? Then you have false cause and effect, assuming that causation is based solely on chronological order. So George W. Bush was elected after Bill Clinton. So it's clear that dissatisfaction with Clinton is what led to Bush's election. Not completely true, maybe. Research would need to be done on that. You'd have to provide sufficient evidence, but assuming causation based on this would be inaccurate. It would be insufficient. Then you have the red herrings. These are irrelevant pieces of information that are incorporated to distract from the main issue. Like, my room might be a mess, but hey, I got an A in math. Okay, but your room is still a mess. So you got to keep an eye out for those red herrings, both in literature and scholarly work and in your own writing. Sometimes people self-contradict their own words, and these are arguments that contradict themselves. Man has evolved to the point that we clearly understand that there's no such thing as evolution. Okay, how have we evolved, but then we also say there's no such thing as evolution? Doesn't make sense. And then you have straw man. This is where we're misrepresenting an argument to make it easier to attack. For example, you should take a long walk every day. The rebuttal: you want me to sell my car or what? You are saying one thing with the intention that what you follow up with is going to beat that argument, which you cannot actually do. Emotional fallacies, apple polishing. So this is when we use flattery as a reason to accept a claim. And then flattery itself suggests agreement with the writer's point based on positive traits. Ground appeal, deciding based on identification with a popular group. Like, since the varsity football players all bought some of the fundraising candy, wouldn't you want to buy some? Like, obviously they did, so you should too. This is kind of where bandwagon also ties in. The need to follow a trend based on the fact that everybody else is doing it. And then you have scare tactics, using fear to persuade. And you also have stereotyping, where we generalize about a group to prove a point. Like, men don't like rom-coms because it's about feelings and relationships. Well, that's not always true. Ethical fallacies consist of argument from outrage. So this is where we use excessive outrage to shock rather than persuade. False authority would be when we cite a celebrity or an unqualified person as authority. So just because LeBron James wears Nikes doesn't mean that you should as well. I mean, you could, but guilt by association is when we discredit someone due to their associations. So, for example, we don't want people like her teaching our kids her father is in prison for murder. Okay, just because her father is in prison doesn't mean that, the teacher is bad. Sometimes ethical fallacies also include personal attacks. This is where we discredit an argument based on personal traits. Poisoning the well. This is where we're sharing negative information to preemptively discredit someone. Scapegoating, kind of similar. We're blaming a specific group or person for broader issues. So, here's more information about ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos has two facets. You have the audience values and the authorial credibility and character. On one hand, in an ethical appeal, the author attempts to tap into the values or ideologies that the audience holds. And when an author evokes cared for values to justify or support their argument, the audience automatically believes the author to be making the right argument. And this sense of referencing what is right connects to the author. So ethos is centered on the author, revolves around two concepts: the credibility of the author as well as his or her character. Credibility, determined by their expertise. Character involves personal history, personal traits. Inevitably, ethos comes down to trust. How can the author get the audience to trust them so that they will accept the argument? To build an ethical appeal, we often see authors referring directly or indirectly to the values that matter to the intended audience. This gets the audience to trust the speaker. We also see the language, the phrasing, imagery, other writing styles common to people who hold those values, thereby talking the talk of the people with those values. Again, it's enforcing that trust between the audience and speaker. To build ethical appeals, we also see a reference to their experience and or authority with the topic. They also may or may not refer to their own character or making an effort to build their character in the text. Pathos means that the author is trying to tap into the audience's emotions in order to get them to agree with the claim. And you want to think of those animal commercials where they're using the pictures of the injured animals, the sad kittens, the really sad Sarah McLachlan music. That's when they're like tying into they're tapping into your emotions. So pathos-based strategies get the audience to open up to the topic, to the argument, or even the author. To build a pathetic appeal, we often see expressive descriptions of people, of places, of events. It puts the reader, the viewer, in that moment. There's a lot of vivid imagery. We're sharing personal stories. We're we're incorporating a vocabulary that is laden with emotion. We're using any information, at all that will evoke an emotional response from the audience. It could be a positive response, it could be a negative response. Logos, which is reason and rationality. When an author relies on this, they're using logic, they're using a careful structure, their objective evidence is utilized to appeal to the audience by using fact-checked information and thorough explanations containing no bias. To build a logical appeal, we often see authors use comparisons, cause and effect thinking, deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, exemplification, elaboration, and coherent thought. If you don't know what those are, definitely read further into this. And that right there, folks, covers rhetorics and audience. If you have any questions over any of this, I know it was a lot of information, please do let me know. If you have no questions, you are ready to move forward.